The Victorian era of the United Kingdom was a time of Queen Victoria's rule from 1837 to 1901. This time was very prosperous for the British people. Trade was at its best. A well-educated middle class ruled the country and the British Empire. Other countries also prospered, but Britain became the greatest great power. The Industrial Revolution continued to increase the productivity and prosperity, especially in the middle and later parts of Victoria's reign. Britain began ruling its trading colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. The British Empire extended all over the world. It used new technologies like the railways and electric telegraph to communicate across these regions. Also, many British citizens moved to the colonies to make their fortune. Another important social change in this period depended on child exploitation. For hundreds of years, children had worked, but with the increased demand for work during the Victorian era and the Industrial Revolution came more and more demanding roles for children to fulfill. It was normal to use children for works that adults couldn't do. Many were used as cheap labor. Working long hours, children were often treated badly. They started working as young as 4 or 5 years old. A young child could not earn much, but even a few pence would be enough to buy food. In fact, many Victorian children were poor and worked to help their families. This was not unusual during these times and not seen at all as cruel. You had to work to receive money, and people thought work was good for children. Moreover, children provided a variety of skills and would do jobs that were as varied as needing to be small. There were so many different jobs, and children considered themselves to be lucky if they received an apprenticeship in trade. Now, let's see some of these child work that were common. At the time, coal was the main source of power. Coal mines were dangerous places where roofs sometimes caved in, explosions happened, and workers got all sorts of injuries. There were very few safety rules. The younger children often worked as trappers, who worked the trapdoors within the ventilation shaft. They sat in a hole hollowed out from them and held a string which was fastened to the door. When they heard the coal wagons coming, they had to open the door by pulling the string. Older children might be employed as coal bearers, carrying loads of coal on their backs in big baskets. Thousands of other children worked in the cotton mills. These were dangerous places to work. With little ventilation, cotton dust caused eye infection, breathing problems, and stomach complaints. Children were especially at risk because the ones as young as 7 years old could be found working even 14 hours a day in the region's mills. Being small and nimble, they were given dangerous jobs, such as climbing underneath moving machinery to remove any cotton pieces that had fallen below. This role was called being a scavenger. There were some serious accidents where children lost their hair when it was caught in the machine. Hands could be crushed, and some children were killed when they went to sleep and fell into the machine. 18th century farms were devoted almost entirely to dairy, beef, or sheep farming. But in this period there were advances in technology, including improved breeds, better drainage of the terrain, and the introduction of chemical fertilizers. Poor families who lived in the countryside would also send their children out to work. Some of the children's roles included guarding the animals, sowing and picking potatoes and other crops, as well as taking the livestock to the market. 7 and 8 years old could work as bird scarers, out in the fields from 4 in the morning until 7 at night, stopping briefly for a lunch of bread, and sometimes they would receive cheese. For tea, they would have bread again or potato, and if they were lucky, they might have some bacon. The climbing boys, and sometimes girls, were technically called chimney sweeps apprentices, and were apprenticed to a master sweep, who, being an adult, was too large to fit into chimney or flue. He would be paid by the parish to teach orphans the craft. The children or their guardians had signed papers of indenture in front of a magistrate, which bound them, the children, to him until they were adults. The master sweep had duties: to teach the craft and its mysteries, to provide the apprentice with a second suit of clothes, to have him cleared at least once a week, to allow him attend to the church, and to not send him up chimneys that were on fire. When engaged, the master sweep would fix a cloth over the fireplace, and the climbing boy would take off its boots and any excess cloth, then get behind it. The flue would be as tall as the house and twist several times. The child would pull his cap down over his face and hold a large flat brush over his head, and wedge his body diagonally in the flue. Using his back, elbows, and knees, he would shimmy up in the flue in the manner of a caterpillar, and use the brush to dislodge loose soot, which would fall over him and down to the bottom. Now it was his job to bag up the soot and carry it back to the master sweep cart or yard. Careless climbing boys could also get stuck with their knees jammed against their chins. The harder they struggled, the tighter they became wedged. They could remain in this position for many hours until they were pushed out from below or pulled out with a rope. If their struggling caused a fall of soot, they would probably suffocate. In 1755, one of the most eminent surgical writers of his period, not only recognized in England but also abroad, Percival Pott, published the first description of an occupational cancer that regarded chimney sweepers. These are some abstracts from his essay. There is a disease peculiar to a certain set of people which has not, at least to my knowledge, been publicly noticed. I mean the chimney sweeper's cancer. It is a disease which always makes its first attack on and its first appearance in the inferior part of the scrotum, where it produces a superficial, painful, ragged, ill-looking sore with hard and rising edges. The trade call it the soot wart. I never saw it under the age of puberty, which is, I suppose, one reason why it is generally taken both by patients and surgeon for venereal. Another abstract says, in no great length of time it pervades the skin, dartos, and membranes of the scrotum, and sides the testicle, which enlarges and hardens, from whence it makes its way up to the spermatic process into the abdomen, most frequently indurating and spoiling the inguinal glands. When arrived within the abdomen, it affects some of the viscera, and then, very soon, becomes painfully destructive. Taking moves from this essay, I wanted to explain the process that in most of cases leads to cancer. In normal conditions, our cells have a mechanism called contact inhibition, which makes cells think, okay, there are many of us, I don't need to reproduce myself. Sometimes, unfortunately, there are some problems. In our case, there is an external factor, the suit, which attacks our cells in their maximum fragility moment, the duplication of the DNA. This leads to the born of a cell that is ill because it hasn't got that contact inhibition mechanism. So it thinks, oh, am I the only cell? I need to reproduce myself now. So this ill cell generates other cells with the same problem. That is the carcinoma, a mass created by these cells that expands in all directions they can.